and how to maximize the power of the next generation. Because really the way that we look at it is that there's really 3 different choices you have when it comes to the next generation. You can either ignore them, which I hear quite a lot of, is like, let's just pretend like they'll, eventually they'll get married and have kids and buy a house, and then they'll stop being really annoying, right? Like, you're just hoping that eventually they're gonna grow out of this phase, like it's a phase, right? Then there is the tolerate, like, I'll deal with you for now, but God, I wish the next generation, can we just skip them, right? Like, is child labor okay yet? Like, how can we go to the next generation, right? And then the third option is the engage option, which takes more intentionality, it takes more effort on the front end, but it's the option that I'm going to be sharing with you at the end, which is actually the most cost efficient and the most important when it comes to actually tying it down to your bottom line. This conversation around why millennials and why do we need to engage with them is incredibly important. I speak around the world, and most groups I talk to have seen a presentation on generations or millennials 3, 4, sometimes 5 different times. And they come to me and they say, Gabrielle, why do we need to keep talking about this problem, right? How do we escape kind of this cycle? The reality is that I'm going to share with you the 3 reasons why this generation is a generation that we need to be discussing specifically. But what most folks don't realize is that we have so many generations in the workforce today that we haven't had in the past. So as you see in this fun little graph I have up here, we've got 83 million millennials in the workforce today. When I'm talking about millennials being born between 1982 and 2000, that means that we're dealing with people as young as 18 and as old as 37. So we have an incredible wide span of folks that it is that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the cool research that we've done specifically on millennials and the trades and manufacturing, which I think is going to be extremely, extremely important to your success and really getting your mind around how do we engage our younger workforce. The first reason that this conversation around millennials is so important is this, and I've got to be honest with you guys, no one is talking about this, and it's why it's so important. We've got the baby boomers. Do I have any boomers in the room? You're like, yes, we're here. You're so excited, right? You're overwhelming me with just gratitude for life. Okay, Gen X. Do I have any Xers in the room? Nice. Yeah, I love Gen X. Gen X is like, by the way, we've been here the whole time, right? So I live in DC, and do you have a question, or are you just making a point?
Actually, I do. Can you clarify Gen X? Does it cover to 81?
Yes. So 1965 to 1981 is the birth year. And then boomers, all y'all super excited to be here, 1946 to 1964. So again, that's a U.S. Census Bureau data that we use, right? So what most people aren't really realizing is that Generation X, those of you who raised your hand, is 1/3 the size of the baby boomer generation. So typically, here's how it works when it comes to one generation going to the next. So we've got boomers, and typically they would look to retire, move on, et cetera, right? You're like villages in Florida, whatever that dream is, you do you. My dad just bought an RV, he's embracing it, right? He's doing his thing. Then we've got Generation X, and then we have the millennials. But here's the thing. Generation X is 1/3 the size of the baby boomers. So what does that mean? It means as baby boomers retire and move on, there aren't enough Generation X to fill those leadership positions. So my friends, the conversation isn't how do we change to millennials and make sure they feel really comfortable and safe and they have trophies for showing up on time, right? That's not the conversation today. The conversation is how do we make sure that we're prepared enough in the industry that we realize that we have an aging population and we need to start to engage the next generation at a younger age. Because I already see it now with the brands that I work with. The companies that aren't adjusting for the next generation, training them to become leaders at younger ages, are already starting to crumble because they don't have enough talent on the bench to be able to fill those leadership positions. I live in DC, and there's this thing called the DC handshake, where they introduce themselves to you, and they're like, hey, who are you and what do you do? They don't care who you are, they just want to know what you do, so don't fall for it, right? So I would introduce myself, and I go to these networking events, they're terrible. And anyway, so this gentleman who's Gen Xer introduced himself. He said, hey, who are you, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm Gabrielle Bosché, I have a firm, we do consulting and training for organizations looking to reach millennials. And he goes, yeah. He goes, I'm Gen X, and no one did that for us. And I looked at him, I said, I totally understand. I said, I think Gen X needs representation, right? You guys need some help. And then in true Xer fashion, he just looks at me and he goes, we don't need your help. And I was like, oh, great. You're really good about being Generation X, right? Because Generation X, a lot of the same standards and things that millennials are now demanding, Gen X has been talking about for such a long time. So when I train millennials, we do a lot of work with university students. I spend a lot of my time helping them understand the things that you're enjoying, everything from work-life balance to maternal and paternal leave has been fought for by parents, by employees, and by employers for decades before. The second reason that we have such a massive need to have this conversation is because, again, we've got 10,000 baby boomers who are reaching the age of 65 every single day in America. Every day. 10,000 baby boomers at the age of 65. Now, the average retirement age used to be 56, and now it's 64. In some industries, we do a lot of work in HVAC, for example. And do you know the average age of a technician in HVAC? 59. 59 years old, because they can't get millennials to go to tech school. They can't get millennials to even consider it as a plausible career option. I've spent the last year and a half, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the research we've been doing on millennials manufacturing and the skilled trades of how do we reach a new generation to get excited about these incredible and fulfilling careers. The third reason that this conversation is so important is, frankly, most organizations can't afford to ignore millennials. So the average cost of losing one millennial is about 1.5 times their salary. So if you start to do the math, depending on how much you're currently paying your employees, it starts to add up incredibly quickly. Even if they're just hourly or salary, we're losing millennials at an extremely high rate. Just yesterday, Bloomberg and Business Insider and Washington Post all came out with stories saying we have record high job openings. I don't know if you guys have been looking at that or not. Do you know what that's going to mean? We've already seen it. I started predicting it a year ago. Because our unemployment rate is so low, employee turnover is starting to tick up. Are you starting to experience this now? Because when their options are open, they're starting to say, well, maybe I'll leave for $1 more, or maybe I'll leave for a better commute, or a nicer boss, or a more exciting workplace culture. This fluorescent light isn't my thing. I don't know why they're quitting, but they're willing to move on for smaller things. So I'm going to be sharing with you the keys to retaining all of your employees, not just millennials. I'm working on my 5th book right now, which is called Keep Them Longer, which has been a 2.5-year study on employee retention across the generations, because what we found is what works with millennials is what works with everybody else. I'm going to be sharing with you the programmatic things. I'm not a theory girl. I have a research firm, but I tell folks all the time, I'm like, we do research, but we hate theory, right? I'm like the famous person in meetings to say, okay, so what do we do with this, right? So I'm not here to talk to you about theory. I want to give you something that you can walk away with, take it to your team and say, hey, here's some specific things that we can start to do. The millennial generation is so massive that we've actually started to divide them up into two different groups. So we've got millennial group A and millennial group B. Millennial group A is the older part of the generation. So they're born between 1981 or 1982 and 1990. And then there's the younger group, the 1991 to 2000. So I'm part of group A. And group A, all the research shows, they're better looking, they're just greater, better dates for weddings. It's science, folks. This is my job. I report, you decide. No, I'm just kidding. No, we've actually found that the older part of the generation has a very distinct worldview because of the role that technology played in their coming of age. What we've actually found is one of the big questions in a number of surveys that folks ask as millennials have graduated from high school over the last 20 years, they said, what number one event has shaped your generation? They asked this as they go into college. For my part of the generation, it's been 9/11. As you would assume, we could all remember where we were, whether we were in class or in college, what happened and how it shaped us. The second half of the generation, the younger part, which are there any of them in the room? Great, we'll talk about them. You don't count. Okay, they're horrendous. No, I'm just kidding. But for the younger part of the generation, that wasn't a big part of their life at that time. So they've actually said the number one event was technology. It's fascinating. A lot of those common events, whether it was the Challenger explosion or the assassination of JFK, those moments kind of solidified a generation. We now have so many aspects. The world is changing so quickly that there's a splintering of the generations. And I share that with you because I get a lot of folks who are part of the millennial generation, and they're like, that's not me. I'm not a millennial. I have a job. I wear shoes, right? Like they're just pretending like all of the stereotypes. I wrote a book called 5 Millennial Myths where I break down a lot of the myths, like millennials are entitled, millennials are addicted to technology, all these things are true. But at the end of every chapter, I talk about, you know, what managers can do and what millennials can do to help bridge the gap. Because let's be honest, guys, it's got to come from both sides and both angles when we're talking about how do we work better together. I'm going to briefly share with you some of the research that we've done on millennials manufacturing and the trades, because I think it's extremely relevant to the discussions that we're having here about employment. So about a year and a half ago, I started to do some preliminary research. We have a number of research partners that we work with, a number of firms here in the US, like Burke International, some folks in Australia, and I started asking questions about the next generation of tradesmen. Because I grew up in a household, my dad's a roofer. I grew up being like the typical little girl going to work with my dad saying, hey dad, I want to be a roofer too. I'm like 5 years old, and he's like, no you don't, right? First person in my family to go to college, first person in my family to get my master's. And it was a completely different mindset when I was kind of coming of age, whereas if it was a different generation, maybe other options weren't there. Maybe I would have gone into a trade, which is, you know, my dad didn't even make that an option for me, even though it's such an incredible career. And that very conversation between parent and child is a huge reason that we don't have more young people going into these professions. Because we had so many parents saying, oh no, it's okay, it's great for me, but you know, maybe you want to go off to college. Because millennials are one of the first generations where it wasn't, are you going to college? It's what college are you going to? So it's been this arms race ever since of how much education you can get. And so now we have millennials who are highly educated and expert baristas, right? You're like, man, that's great latte art. You're like, what did you go to school for again, right? You're like, maybe let's apply your skills in something more practical, right? But my generation, so many of us weren't ever exposed to those types of jobs and careers. So I want to share with you some of the research that we've been doing, because I got into it because I wanted to help my dad and people like my dad who were incredibly hardworking, working in really important industries who have been forgotten by my generation, by career counselors, by parents, by folks who didn't even make it an option, because those are the industries, these are the industry that we're talking about right now. They're absolutely fundamental to running America. Here's what we found, is we found that the next generation in the trades is highly loyal. I asked them, I said, how long do you plan on staying at this current job? The average was 5 to 10 years. When I look at across other industries, the average for millennials is between 2 and 3. So we see a highly loyal generation. When I asked them why they would quit, they said everything from they would want to have more training and development, and they'd want more opportunity to personally grow. These folks aren't leaving for just a couple more dollars. They're coming in and they're working for you, and they're wanting to become integral parts of your organization. Now, employment has certainly changed since the recession. Employment used to be very transactional. I come in, I work for you, you pay me, you give me salary, benefits, maybe a couple of weeks of time off, and that's our exchange, right? Like, you don't hate me, I kind of hate you, and then we'll just like work together till I retire, right? That's employment. Things have changed. It's no longer this transactional relationship. It's turned into a transformational relationship where employees are now coming in to work for organizations that they want to be a part of making that organization a better place to work. We see that particularly with the next generation who, when we ask millennials and we do career fairs, and we've done a number of research projects around what are millennials looking for in their next job, other than like, you know, skateboards and like a human hamster wheel or whatever they're asking for. That would be cool. Whatever they're asking for, we ask them, the number one thing that they say is they want to work somewhere where they can make a difference. Most organizations aren't set up for that. They're like, well, we give to XYZ charity, like that's fine. Millennials want tangible, they want to feel, they want to touch, taste, and smell the difference that they're making. That's why nearly 50% of millennials by the time they hit age 30 are working for a nonprofit organization. They're flooding the nonprofit market because they want to make a difference, but they ain't stupid. They got student loan debt and they're like, oh crap, maybe making like, you know, $22,000 a year and like paying just as much in rent isn't going to be the thing for me, right? So what we've actually found was that they were looking for those training and development opportunities, but they were extremely loyal when you started to bridge that gap. When you started to realize that this next generation of employees, you can't keep treating them like their older counterparts, saying, well, they'll figure it out eventually, or we'll just treat them the same and then they'll eventually change to our kind of way of being. We're simply just seeing that that isn't the case. In fact, a lot of these standards, as millennials get into their 30s, they're actually staying quite stable. So like I said, millennials are on average, the highest or oldest millennial is 37 or 38 years old right now. We're still saying the average millennial is staying at their job between 2 and 3 years. We're seeing that they're renting rather than buying, because millennials care about access, not ownership. And we're starting to see that a lot of the same standards that they were starting to adopt in their 20s are lasting to their 30s. Because on average, millennials are taking about 7 years longer to get married, have kids, buy a house, et cetera. So we've got this kind of longer gangplank into kind of what kind of the standard 30s and 40s of an American adult is going to be. So you can, again, choose to say, why don't they just figure it out, starting to complain. I get it, right? I employ millennials. You have bad stories about millennials, I can match them, right? I have these moments with people where I'm just like, don't, you're making us look bad, right? You're everything that's wrong with our generation. I tell them that, and then they're like, why does my boss hate me? Because I love you enough to say, stop being entitled, get to work, right? Because sometimes you have to provide the context and the tough love to the next generation, because most folks just get frustrated and talk behind their back. My generation needs to get the feedback in real time of how they're doing and how they can better integrate into the next generation. I want to share with you the 3 steps to better engaging the next generation. And like I said at the beginning of the talk, these are things that work for every generation, not just millennials. These are the 3 strategies that we plugged into everything from the HVAC technician to the boutique consulting firm to Microsoft and Google. These are the things that work because they're the principles that work that I'm going to share with you here today. The first strategy, look at you guys all taking notes. No one's taking notes. That's fine. You're all like, we were supposed to take notes. You can. You get extra credit. All right, the first step is setting expectations early and often. I've got to be honest, guys. When I work with organizations and they have high turnover rates, the number one reason is expectations. Now, no one is saying that. No one on the employer side is saying, well, they didn't meet our expectations. And no one on the employee side is, well, they didn't meet my expectations. But everything comes down to expectations. Think about it. If you were, expecting to get more access to the CEO or get a raise every 6 months or, get, a company car, and that wasn't met, you're more likely to get bitter, frustrated, and start to look for other employment. The same thing's in relationships. If your expectation was, on Tuesdays it's date night and, your partner was supposed to bring you flowers and chocolate and a marching band, I don't know what's going on in your life. If that's your expectation and on Tuesday, no marching band, you're going to be pretty darn upset because you're like, that's what my expectation was. So when you don't have conversations about what expectations are, you're losing out on the next generation. Now, when it comes to expectations, what we've actually found is that oftentimes is interpreted as entitlement. Now, how many of you have ever thought millennials are entitled? Oh, all raise your hands. Y'all aren't saints here. You're like, no, I don't. I'm colorblind. I'm blind to generations. It's okay, all liars, right? Of course, I see it all the time with my generation. That's the number one word most associated with millennials, if you Google it, that millennials are entitled. That we show up, we work for you, and we're like, I would like a raise and a hug, and is there a company puppy that I get to check out, right? They're looking for, they do this thing. It's a thing where this next generation may have expectations that are coming in and they're wildly fantastical, and you're like, who said that was a normal thing for you, right? And sometimes it's their parents, sometimes it's the media at large, sometimes it's their very active imagination, but it's your job and your role. They've got great talent, they've got the DNA for greatness, but along the way their expectations have been bent. The number one way that you can reset those expectations is in an onboarding program. If you have an onboarding program that helps set the expectations for your staff where they know, okay, great, here's the process here. Here's how I get from A to Z. Here's how I build my career. Here's what career pathing looks like in my organization. You're going to do far better than your competitors because you're going to learn that this next generation is taking a very active role in their career. They're wanting to be extremely involved from the beginning. Whereas before, you go in, you get a job, and you work, right? If you're Gen X, the career pathing kind of mantra is you figure it out as you go along, right? You just figure it out. It's called life, you just get from A to Z. But what's fascinating, you can learn so much about a generation based off of how they were educated. Millennials have been taught to the test their entire lives. Where we went into college or high school, we standardized testing has made everything turn to the back of the book, find the answer, and tell me what I need to do to make an A. It's the same thing millennials are coming in and they're working for you. They're saying, hey, how do I get an A? I want to do well. And by that, a lot of times that's interpreted as, just them looking for narcissistic feedback, right? This idea of tell me how great I am. And you're thinking, I'm not giving you a trophy just for existing. Like, you're cute, you're not that cute, I'm not going to give you a trophy, right? The fact that this next generation has an expectation for feedback, which I'm going to share with you here in a moment, is not because millennials want to know how great they're doing all the time. In fact, our research shows that millennials want to have more constructive feedback than positive feedback, because they're wanting to know that you care enough to help us improve our performance. Millennials are much more metric-based than many folks even realize. The second step is to provide context. I'm sure many of you have heard of Simon Sinek. He has the TED Talk, Start With Why. He's got the book, Start With Why. If y'all haven't read the book, I just summed it up for you, so you start with why. Great. Starting with why is imperative, whether the person who's working for you is 22 or 62. Right? So starting with why before the what or the how is so important. Most of us have been taught how to manage, where you start with the what, maybe if they look needy, the how, but you never get to the why, because it's usually because I said so or it's your job, right? Guys, I work with the military. Having these conversations with base commanders about starting with why is hilarious, number one, because they're like, it's an order. I'm like, maybe softer, maybe not with the yelling, right? Because on base, and I remember, and my first client was the Navy, and I remember walking on base, and they're like, oh yeah, you can't have any of your technology with you. I'm like, oh, so just like my tablet's in the car, but I can bring my phone? They're like, no phone. I'm like, so my laptop's okay. They're like, no technology whatsoever. I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong here, right? I felt like they were punishing me. But what's interesting, and some of you who don't have social media policies, I'll get to you guys here in a second, but what we were finding is that their millennial civilians who were on base were quitting because they couldn't bring their technology in with them. And their bosses were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, that's terrible. I'm like, number one, you're just as addicted to the technology as anybody else, right? I was giving this talk once on base, and this one woman had her BlackBerry out, because that's more secure. And so she is on her BlackBerry, and she's like, this millennial next to me was not even paying attention. I'm like, you're probably playing Candy Crush right now. Don't pretend just because she's younger than you that she's not abusing the technology. I'm like, I think Farmville was a thing. It's not anymore. We've moved on. But what I've found is when this next generation was coming on base, they were like, I can't bring my phone with me, because it's an expectation that they have their phone with them at all time, because for their phone, it was access to the world. Here's the key thing with technology. Millennials are the first generation that technology isn't just how they see the world, it's how the world sees them as well. So it's really grown to a part of this generation's identity. So it's not just them staying up to date about what's happening, it's also to access. And that constant access, again, is one of the key expectations when it comes to the next generation. So the context piece is important, because people are wanting to know the why before everything else. So if I were to have you come over to my house, and I had a giant pile of dirt on one side of my backyard. I live in an apartment, let's be real, I'm a millennial. This is totally a fictitious thing, but let's pretend, right? There's a giant pile of dirt, and I said, hey, can you just move it to the other side, just over there? You'd probably want to know what? I would hope so, right? Because you guys are just like, sure, why not, right? No, you would want to know why. Am I landscaping? Am I putting in a pool? Is there a dead body involved? These are clarifying questions you should ask when there's a lot of dirt involved, right? You would want to know the why before you started. Or if I said, hey, do you have any plans this weekend? If you're smart, you say, well, it depends, right? Because if not, you're just going to get volunteered to help someone move, right? So you always ask the clarifying question. It depends. I don't know. I might have some time. If I said, oh, great, I'm building a house, wanted to know if you had some time for some drywall. Nope, I'm definitely busy. Found out I have a niece. This is new. I'm excited. Got to go visit her in Florida. I just found out. It's crazy, right? You would not probably want to do that. But if I were to say, hey, I don't know if you have some time on Saturday. We're looking for a couple of guys. We're working with Habitat for Humanity, and we just need a couple people to help. We're building a house for this guy. He's a veteran from Afghanistan. He lost both of his legs. Do you have a couple of hours? You would probably say what? You are heartless people. Come on. He lost his legs. Yes, you would say. I'm like, the rest of you I'm done with. The 4 of you who have souls can come with me and make a difference. No, it's true. You would most likely say, yeah, of course I would want to help because you knew the why before you got into it. We understand that on a mental level, but when it comes into the office, we're like, get this done by Tuesday, right? And then you walk out. And they're like, oh, okay, is it important? Do you want me to shift other things around? Why, this? Why now? Why me? Having clarifying conversations, especially on the front end when you're working with young employees, is so important. You're not going to have to do this the rest of their career, but training them to answer those questions themselves, because when you realize that my generation has been given a syllabus in every single step of their lives, coming into work for you and they don't have the context, they don't have a rubric for success, they're looking to you to give them direction, and you're looking back at them like, do it yourself. That's where the tension comes in, because we have a generation who has been so used to having an older generation help them and lead them, that conversation and that relationship is certainly something that's changed quite a bit. And it's so funny. I mean, I work with folks all the time where I get the managers, and I can usually tell where they're the ones complaining about the millennials. I had this one manager that I was working with. We worked with a big trucking company out of the Northwest, and he would call me and say, Gabrielle, this millennial comes in my office, and he puts his feet on my desk, and he calls me by my first name, and I don't know what to do with him. And I'm on the other phone like, that's awesome. That's so cool. And he goes, no, it's not cool, right? Because for him and his generation, it was a sign of disrespect that someone would want to come in as his equal. But when you understand how millennials see leadership, you realize that the equality piece of it is the ultimate sign of respect for a new generation. That's not saying we want to pull you down and we don't, respect who you are and the work that you put in, but millennials want to have a relationship with you. Again, I work with the military where hierarchy is the ultimate sign of respect, right? If I'm hidden away and you don't know who I am and I'm just kind of like this floating character that you're like, oh gosh, it's easier to fear that person because you don't have a relationship with them. Millennials are so used to having high access to things, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat, where we can have access to major celebrities just because of the technology that's in our back pocket. So for us to be able to tweet at a celebrity and get a response, but we can't talk to our boss, it's mind-blowing to us, because we're like, why can't I have that type of relationship? So millennials are wanting to have a relationship with folks. I'm going to talk to you in a moment about the different types of leadership styles based off of the generations, because it's going to be really important and really helpful for you to understand why a lot of this tension exists between the multiple generations based off of some of the research that we've been doing out of Boise State. The third step is to connect everything to purpose. This has been a really fascinating journey. Like I said, I've been on this journey for about 11 years, studying the millennial motivation and how to tap into the next generation and make sure that they're not only alive, but they're committed. What I've found working across generations is that every single person, no matter how old they are, is searching for significance. People want to know that their work matters. They want to know that they're seen. No one wants to talk about their work and say, yeah, I have to get stuck in traffic for like 2 hours and I get to the office and then, my boss yells at me and then, then someone steals my lunch from the fridge. Like, it's great, life is good. No one says that, right? Everyone wants to have a great relationship with their boss, with their coworkers, with their job. They all want to know that their work matters. I was speaking at a CTO conference, a Chief Technology Officer conference. Not like I didn't know if you guys knew what CTO. I didn't know what CTO was. They're like, come speak at this thing. I was like, I don't know what that means. That sounds fun. So I'm in California speaking at the CTO conference, and this gentleman comes up to me afterwards, and he was the CTO of the California Highway Patrol. I was like, please don't tell me you remember me. I grew up in California, so it was a long-standing relationship with CHP. So I was talking to him, and he said, I had this crazy experience 2 weeks ago. He went into the office on a Saturday, and there was a guy who was repairing one of their towers outside. And he was like, yeah, I'm just going to go say hi to the guy. So he, leaves his office, goes outside. The guy's coming down off the tower, and he said, hey, how are you doing? Just having a conversation with them. And the guy's like, I have a weird question. can I use your bathroom? And he's like, not a weird question, sure. So he lets him in the building. They're walking down the hall, and he goes, I'm sorry, I have another really weird question. He's like, all right, wasn't that weird the first time? Go for it. And he said, my daughter just had bring your parent to work day, and I couldn't make it, but when someone asked her what her dad did, she told him, and she asked if what I did mattered, and what if it made a difference. And she asked me that. And the CTO turns to this repairman and he said, well, what did you say? And he said, I didn't know. And this guy who's like 6'2" and just like this like mountain of a man was like, what do you mean you didn't know if your work mattered? He goes, yeah, I don't know, I just repair stuff. He's like, no, are you kidding me? You repair these towers that if anyone calls 911, it goes straight to our towers, and then a dispatcher sends someone out, and it could be an elderly woman who's stuck on the side of the road, or, God forbid something, more tragic happens where there's a fatality, and we have to send out our guys immediately. If you don't make these towers work properly, people's lives are at stake. What you do matters. And this repairman just started swelling up with tears because he'd never made that connection himself. For him, he was just doing his job. He was climbing up stuff and plugging wires in. I don't know what he does for a living, but it matters. And no one took the time. This man was 45 years old, and he'd been doing it for 15 years. And he couldn't answer his daughter when his daughter said, is what you do, is that important? Does it make a difference? As employers, we have the responsibility to make that connection to our employees. Don't put it on them and say, well, you should know that your work matters. They don't. They absolutely don't. We have the opportunity to make every little thing that they do, whether it's, just driving a truck or, working on a machine, that what they do actually matters at the end of the day. One of my first jobs after college was working at this consulting firm, which I thought was a very big deal at the time because all my friends were baristas and I was like in an office, right? I was a very big deal. So I remember my first day, they like walked me down the hall and they said, well, here's your office. And I said, wow, and I felt really important. They closed the door and I found out very quickly it was a converted cleaning closet. So not all the effects of the bleach have worn off. It smelled really, really bad. So I'm in this little cleaning closet with no window. They put up a fake window just to be jerks about it, the types. So I'm sitting in this closet, and it's been a couple months, and I'm thinking, I had all these dreams, like I'm gonna be on conference calls, right? I don't know, in college things seem like a much bigger deal than they are now. So I was like, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I didn't do that. So I ended up doing cold calls, which for a millennial is like purgatory, right? Like I'm just like, what did I do, right? So I remember we had to train a team of millennial salespeople, and I was talking to them about cold calling. It was adorable. I remember talking to these girls. I'm like, so cold calling? They're like, what's cold calling? It's like, well, you call people that you don't know and don't want to talk to you. And they're like, no, right? It was like the worst experience ever. I don't think she's still in sales. Let's just say she found a different career path. Starbucks, kidding. So I remember having this moment like, this is not what I wanted. I'm supposed to be on conference calls, right? Like, obviously. So my boss walked by my office, and he realized that I was not, excited about working there still. And he took just 20 seconds out of his day, and he said, hey, Gabby, I just wanted to say I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I know you're probably not doing the work that you thought you'd be doing. But when you came here, we needed you to work on these projects, and you're supporting so many folks on this team, and you helping your clients is helping us all serve our clients better. And I just wanted to say thank you. That took, 15 seconds out of his day for him to provide some context to what it is that I was doing. I was working a fax machine. I thought that was a joke. When they're like, oh yeah, the fax machine, I'm like, that's not really a thing anymore. All right, great. Like, what's like the PDF scanner? Is that a thing? Like we still use fax machines. I was so confused. But this man helped me understand. I was, picking up coffee and, working on a fax machine. I never got it to work. It was very confusing. It was like, there's got to be an app for this. There is, by the way. There is a faxing app, and it has saved my butt many a time. I didn't know why I was working there, what I was doing, but it took him 10 seconds. It's not a long, drawn-out sonnet of how important your employees are. It's just quick micro pieces of feedback to help them understand that what they do matters. So I want you to turn to some folks sitting next to you. I want to give you guys a story and have you guys fix this problem for me. So it's 6 p.m. You are getting ready to leave the office, and you just find out that you have a client who needs something from you at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So you're getting ready to leave, everyone in your office is getting ready to leave, and the only person who can work on this assignment is your millennial assistant. So you walk over to your desk and you're like, hey, I'm really sorry. I know you probably want to leave. I want to leave. However, we have a client, just found out. I'm really sorry. Can you stay late and work on this project with me? Little did you know that this millennial, her best friend just flew in from Florida. They just bought these concert tickets. It's a big deal. So they spent like $400 on these tickets. They're like going out to this concert. It starts at 8 p.m. So how do you work with your millennial to make sure that the work gets done by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning? I'll give you a few minutes to figure it out. All right, guys, let's come back together. See how well y'all did. All right, can I get a volunteer from this section? Everybody all at once, yes.
When I was in my generation, I would have missed the concert and stayed late and worked. But I understand that now, like I have millennials as children.
Sure.
My eldest is 24, and if he spent $400 on a concert ticket, there's no way in hell he would be able to afford to not miss it because he doesn't have that much money.
Sure.
So I think as an employer, I would say, fine, go to the concert, but show up afterwards and we'll work through the night.
Sure.
And that's how I would approach it, being that I have a child and spending $400 on
You understand.
It's a big deal for him.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't expect him to miss it.
Very good. Great. What about someone from over here?
Talk about the potential of, everybody has devices. It's something they might be able to do a little bit during the intermissions.
Sure.
We didn't know really what the scope of the work, I guess, was.
Sure. Yeah, there's like an app for breathalyzer, so you just breathe into it. There probably is. I don't know. Did you have in the back?
I think you said millennials, and you talked about the fact of how close relationships are.
Sure.
So this person coming in for this contract is more important than even the
Sure.
And what I think might be the thing too is to offer up the opportunity for a relationship with you. Look at them and say, you know, I really need this done, but I'd really like you to stick around and help me with this.
Sure.
Here's my deal. You come in, we pull in some food. Like your friend Bob, I'd like to meet him.
Yeah.
And what it comes down to is
Put them to work too. Come on. That's great. Sure.
the other thing too is then when we get done, we're going to be done with this for tonight in time for you to get that conference.
Sure.
Guess what? I'm going to provide the ride back.
Wow, look at you. He's an Uber driver on the side. Who knew? No, that's great. Yeah, Lyft. Oh, I'm sorry. We classy. All right, go ahead.
We discuss together, they discuss together, and then we discuss together. My first thought was, if I was the boss, I'd just do it for him.
Sure.
I'd just knock it out, because that's how we get it done faster.
Sure.
I have more knowledge of what is needed. They have solid plans, they spend money, somebody's flown in.
Sure.
It's probably really important to them, and I would take that sacrifice for my employees.
Sure.
I had the same thought, but my thinking was a little bit different, meaning that I would do that because if they were still working for me at this point, they are the kind of person I would do that for and would
Sure.
expect to do that for me
Yeah.
if it was needed. Or otherwise, they wouldn't be working for me in the first place.
Or you fire them and then do the work anyway, right? I didn't want you anyway. Yeah.
I have people who are working for me who I'd be willing to do that for.
Great point. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
One of our options was to do a similar thing where the boss wound up doing it, but kind of leverage that into building trust in a relationship
Sure.
in terms of appreciation, allowing them to do something that you know is really important to them, where we also kind of acknowledge maybe from our generation, it might have been a different choice if it was just looking at us.
Sure.
We may have been the ones to give up it.
Sure.
But
Without even bringing it up, right? Like my boss doesn't need to know I have a personal life, right? Like, let's just not even bring that up. The interesting thing is too, and I've asked folks this question, would it have been different if it was not a concert with friends, but maybe it was like their child's recital? And does that change the dynamics at all? Because many of us would say, well, sure, if it's your kid's recital, that's important, and no, you shouldn't miss that. But if it's just your friends and going to a concert, it's not that big of a deal. Without realizing that for many millennials, their friends are like their family. If they're taking 7 years longer to get married, have kids, that's the closest thing that they have. And one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders make is that they project their own personal priorities on the next generation. And so you guys have all said that, which I think is highly emotionally intelligent of you to realize, hey, this wouldn't have been a priority for me, or when I was coming up, I wouldn't have even brought it up. But because it's important to them, I'll make it important to me. So there really is no perfect answer, but it's a scenario that happens in one way or the other all the time in multi-generational workforces, where you have moments that happen where you would have reacted differently because of your own generation or your own upbringing. I was just in Albany yesterday doing this same scenario with a group of lawyers. That was hilarious because one of the partners, when I explained to them that, that millennials think that they treat their family and their friends very similar because many of them don't have young families yet. There's this partner on the side who just stood up and goes, well, that's ridiculous. And I was like, okay, that's a fair point, right? Because for him, he was like, no, we didn't even mention that we were like married and had kids, right? It was like the unspoken. Like you don't bring it up. And millennials are like, do you want to be my Facebook friend? And you're like, too much, right? Because this generation has very blurred lines between personal life and professional life where we want to share our lives at work. And it's not because we're not professional, but it's because we've grown up with technology that has blended our lives together so quickly and so seamlessly that we're wanting to have that type of relationship at work. So like I said, guys, I want to get into the nitty-gritty, into the practical side of what this actually looks like. Like I said before, when it comes down to retention programs, onboarding is the #1 strategy to do that. We work with an organization out of Australia, and we did some research on onboarding and the role it plays in retention. Here's what we found. Within 6 weeks, it's crazy, within 6 weeks, millennials determine how long they're going to stay at your company. 6 weeks. They're measuring everything from their career path, they're looking at their coworkers, their commute, their opportunity for growth. And most folks, their onboarding is like, hey, welcome, really excited that you're here. Death by PowerPoint, here's a handbook you're never gonna read. Sit here till noon and we'll go over your health benefits, right? That's like at a healthy company, right? Some folks are like, sit in the corner, stare at the wall, I'll come and get you when I need you. And they're just like, please don't hurt me, right? We treat onboarding like this reactive, when in reality, your onboarding should be training them with muscle memory to find the folks that they need to find, to learn the story of the organization, to understand the culture and the unspoken rules. If you've started a job in the last 10 years, you remember your first day. There's always that high anxiety of, okay, what's right, what's wrong, what can I do, what can't I do? There's so many unspokens. If you clarify that for your folks, they're gonna realize that you care enough about them that you went the extra mile. If you guys have not updated your onboarding program in the last 5 years, please, please, please come up to me. We have a free white paper on how to create an onboarding program for the next generation. And just give me your card, just put it up here, and I will send it to you for free. I only hand it out when we do presentations like this because I believe so strongly that onboarding programs can make or break an organization, and most folks are really behind the ball and it's really hurting them. The second program we found works really well when it comes to engaging millennials is mentoring. Remember I told you 10,000 baby boomers are hitting the age of 65. When they leave, the institutional knowledge and brilliance of that generation is moving on. I tell folks all the time, millennials don't need other generations for information, because we have Siri for that. She listens constantly. We need other generations for application and interpretation. It's that context piece. You can only find that within mentoring. Mentoring programs shouldn't just be top down, it has to be lateral and bottom up, creating a culture where everyone is willing to learn from one another rather than just, sitting and waiting for the Yoda to come in and pass that information down. If you're not having those cross-generational teams where you have someone who's apprenticing someone who's younger, you're going to miss out on the brilliance that happens naturally within the multiple generations. The third strategy that we found works when it comes to attracting and retaining millennials is having training and development programs. So Gallup, they're the employee engagement polling company, they polled millennials and they found the number one thing millennials said that they would quit for that no other generation even mentioned was training and development. That was the only thing millennials said, yeah, I'd quit if I don't feel like I'm getting enough training and development. So we did some research, we ran focus groups, and what we found was when they said training and development, because you don't know what that means, do I need to send you off to a conference? Is there a certification I can pay for? What do you want? We found millennials wanted things like, how do I manage someone who's older than me? How do I help my manager better manage me better? How do I deal with conflict? Because millennials, we hook up and break up online, right? We just swipe, I hate you, right? They can't do that to their boss. There's probably gonna be an app for that sometime in the future. I'm just gonna swipe. I literally had a friend of mine text me yesterday and he said, is it okay if I break up on Skype? And I was like, he's asking for a friend. I'm like, well, I guess if you can't meet them in person, right? But this is a generation who's using technology. The same friend also to quit his job on Skype. So there's a theme here, right? You're just sorry, bad connection. No, just me, okay. This is a generation who uses technology all the time to be able to distance themselves, but training and development is such an incredible way for you to be able to create a culture where folks are constantly being invested in. Because if you have a training development program, as soon as you hire someone, your onboarding should be 6 weeks, by the way. It should have micro training throughout. It shouldn't be one and done. You have to have mini trainings. And then you should say, okay, great, here's the career paths options. Pick one, and we'll have training along the way. That's what millennials are looking for. They're looking for clarity in their careers. And guys, especially in an environment that is as competitive as it is right now, it's not just millennials. If you are not investing in your folks, they're willing to move on because every employee wants to know that their boss cares about them as much as they care about the company. That's what all of these programs do, is it shows we're invested enough in you because we believe that you're special enough to invest in. And sometimes I do this talk and folks will raise their hand and but what if they leave? You're all thinking it, right? Well, great, I spent all this money, and then they walk out the door. One of my favorite quotes is from John Maxwell, the leadership expert. He says, you're concerned about if you spend all this money on training and then they leave. But have you ever thought about what happens if you don't train them and they stay? That is the challenge that we're dealing with. I would rather invest money and know that I can get 2 great years out of someone versus 20 years where they're just an accessory in my office. You want highly engaged, highly motivated, excited people. I was doing a focus group once, and one young woman even said that. She said, would you rather have me work my butt off, she didn't say that, work my butt off for you for 5 years, or barely care for 15? And this was a room full of employers, and they're like, well, right? Because they were so old school that they thought butts and seats meant productivity, but that is not the economy that we're working on. It's highly engaging, highly competitive, and you have to make sure that every single person on your team cares. I want to share with you the 3 big shifts that need to be made in order to engage the next generation. The first shift is to change the mindset of that's how we've always done it. I see that all the time of you bring in someone new and you're like, no, we've always done it this way, right? So when I talked about how different generations lead, baby boomers, nope, still not excited. Okay. I thought maybe by the end you were excited. It's not true. That's fine. So baby boomers tend to lead from the top down, right? Very process-oriented. There's an A, and there's a B, and then there's a C, right? You don't skip B, because we confirmed B in a meeting 12 years ago, and B is now standard. There's a memo somewhere in a file folder. That's why we do B, right? And millennials are walking in, and they're like, A, B, what? That doesn't make sense. Why don't we do 1, 2, 3? Actually, is there an app for this? And you're like, good God, okay, just do the work, stop asking the questions, right? But so many in the boomer generation invented the process, and so they're saying that's how we've always done it, that's how we'll always do it, when in reality there's a new generation who's asking why. And millennials ask why not to disrespect you and not to show any sort of disdain for what you've done. We're asking why because we want to put our fingerprints on it, and we want to make a difference, and we want to be a part of making that process better. Generation X leads from the side. So very independent. I call Gen X the generation of cats. Like, we will come out and play when we want to, but don't touch me, right? Like, I will figure it out. Don't touch, right? So Gen X leads from the side. I'll send you an email. It'll be like a checklist, right? My Gen Xers are always like making out checklists and sometimes put stuff on the checklist that they've already done because it feels really good. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. You already did it. So Gen X leads from the side. Millennials lead from the middle, extremely collaborative. So when a millennial gets a leadership assignment, they're immediately turning around to their friends saying, hey, what do you think we should do? And should we do that? And let's try this. And to another generation, collaboration looks like weakness. Because you may think, oh my gosh, they don't know the answer. They have to ask their friends. But we're looking at an older generation who won't ask for help, and we're saying, well, that looks like weakness because you're not willing to say that there could be other ideas out there. So realizing millennials are extremely collaborative, that's not a weakness, that's a strength. And when you realize how each generation leads, you can better collaborate together. The second shift that you need to make is the wait your turn shift. I hear it all the time, like, okay, it took me 10 years to get to where I am, kiddo. You know, you've only been here for 2, wait your turn, right? We see that all the time when in reality, there's a fast-paced acceleration that's happening within the workforce now. Like I said, if we don't train the next generation quickly enough, we're going to start to see a dismantling of organizations and industries because we haven't brought millennials up into positions of leadership. And the great news is millennials want to become those leaders. They just don't have the context yet. They don't have the application and they don't have the interpretation. The third shift is to change this mindset of projecting your own experience on the next generation, like I said before. It's the biggest mistake folks are making. Your own experience, your own priorities, your own ideas, without looking at the next generation, embracing them for who they are, and helping them thrive in the workplace that it is that you're leading. So I want to open it up for some questions here. Specific questions, if you have a scenario that you'd like to go over. We have a microphone. This is professional, folks. Got a microphone. You don't just have to yell. So are there any specific questions I can help answer? Yes?
So you kind of painted a little bit of a picture that millennials are fragile, right? Maybe even sticks of dynamite, right? And if it comes a time to issue accountability, how would you go about that?
Sure, great point. I didn't say millennials are fragile, but but there are certainly some porcelain ones out there. Let's be real. Like, they're fun. Here's a great way to do it, and feedback is one of the most important ways that you can provide feedback. So this is really important. I usually have people say this is the most helpful part of the presentation. Thanks for setting me up for it. Not a planted question. Feedback we're usually taught how to do in like the sandwich cookie, right? You're really great. We love you on the team. Please stop doing this or we're gonna have to let you go. And we really love you. Thank you for your contribution. You're important, right? We do the sandwich cookie, which as a manager feels really good. But when you're giving it to a millennial, we've actually found they forget the cream filling. So what we've actually found works really well is what we call the stoplight approach. So red, stop doing these things, right? And here's why you need to stop doing these things. Why is very important. Not just stop, here's why you need to do it, right? Like people die, right? So tell the why. Yellow is you need to improve on these specific things. Here's the things that you can do better at. Be better about being on time. Be better at professional dress. Whatever that thing is, be better at. And then green is keep doing these things. So giving them something specific about you're really great when you're with customers, or you're really good at summarizing information, and providing the why for that as well. Because most people do feedback when it comes to like the 365 feedback at the end of the year. I tell people all the time, if you're waiting for the end of the year to give a millennial feedback to, you probably won't have a millennial to give feedback to. This generation is used to constant likes, constant shares, kind of that instant access to information. I can find out if a video goes viral, but I can't find out how I'm doing. So we've actually found the stoplight approach when it comes to providing that feedback, constructive and positive, works really well. Yeah.
I am a millennial, Group B. I'm pretty young, 25, right? So I'm on the younger end of the spectrum here. I work for an organization, and in our organization, everybody, I'd say about 90% of the employees are like late 40s or older.
Sure.
And it is really difficult for me to connect and work with them,
Sure.
right? Because, you know, I'm an entitled whatever that's on his phone, and oh boy, he knows how to change the HDMI, you know, let's get the computer guy to go over here and do it.
Sure.
How do I connect and work
Great
with
point.
that group better? How do I say, hey, go check out the millennial solution. Let's work on this together, right?
Sure.
Because they don't want to collaborate. So how would you suggest to the younger generation to work better with the older generation?
Sure, really great point. Also not a planted question. Buy my book. No, I'm just kidding, but really. Like for more information, it really is. So in my book, 5 Millennial Myths, I have tips for managers and tips for millennials because I totally agree. Not enough people are teaching our generation how to relate and work with the older generation. And that's, again, where everything comes in. So many people are telling executives, like, you need to change everything you're doing, like more lava lamps. And millennials are like, I just want to have a relationship with someone who's like my superior or my peer or whatever. It's asking constructive questions and realizing that they will have those stereotypes associated with you and looking for opportunities to overcome them. Frankly, I love the fact that people think millennials are super lazy. So I can show up 5 minutes early and people are like, she's a goddess. And I'm like, cool, like this is fine, right? That's great that there are low expectations, but having an open conversation too with folks saying like, hey, I want to connect with you. Like, how does that make sense for you in a way that is like real and authentic and not creepy, right? So if you want to go out of your way to ask questions about kind of them, their story, finding ways to kind of bring in their experience and their wisdom. Every person, no matter how old they are, wants to know that they have a little bit of brilliance and expertise. So if you can find ways to let them showcase that, that's a really great way to connect with someone quickly. So that way you're not just seen as the tech guy. Because I get that all the time where people are like, I reverse mentor all the time. Sammy across the street fixes my internet. I'm like, that's not reverse mentoring. I'm like, you need to actually have a conversation when he's, you know, fixing the HDMI or, you know, whatever it is that you're doing. So asking more targeted questions and then just realizing that you can find ways to not be entitled millennial is great. Or do you have a question? Yes, all the questions.
So many questions. All right, it is on. So as a Group A, somebody that's going to eventually have to manage Group B and Gen Z coming up, with your research, what new trends, what? Yeah. I've been here longer.
Yeah, that's right. Hit the road, kids.
What new trend? I didn't say it was going to be here. Maybe I'll find a new job. They all love me. It's okay.
You're good.
What new trends do you see starting to develop? Because these generational gaps don't happen immediately.
Sure.
So what new stuff are you starting to see in your research that maybe we need to prepare for rather
Great
than
point.
trying to look back on and figure out, well, where did we go wrong? What do we do to fix it?
Sure.
How do we prepare for this next shift that's bound to happen?
Yeah, so Generation Z, usually typically people are like, what about the next generation? Or like, they less entitled? Like, please help us. So Gen Z starts with 2001, will be last around till 2020. There isn't a lot of data because they're under the age of 18 right now, but what we know is that they're going to act more like Generation X, so they are going to be more independent, more individual problem solvers. So we're going to see a really big difference in how people work on teams. Because we've got Gen X who totally works on teams really well, but also too great at delegating, great at doing things on your own when you need to get it done. Millennials who are extremely collaborative and want to, talk and collaborate and have an app to all work together. And we're going to see Gen Z who's like, no, I'll just do it myself. So we're going to see a really interesting pull on that. Of course, communication is going to be a big part of that as well. Science is actually showing there's some really interesting, creepy brain science about Gen Z where their brains are actually forming in a different way, where they're not necessarily able to recognize micro-expressions. So like really upset, really angry, et cetera, because they're so used to seeing everything on a screen. So if you think millennials are hard to deal with now when it comes to technology, I tell folks all the time they're the appetizer to Gen Z, who's going to be so used to using technology that's going to be the expectation. And so those are some of the skills we're going to have to start imparting in the next generation as employers. Because it used to be, I want you to come with these certain set of skills. I sound like Liam Neeson, have a certain set. I can't do the thing. They're coming in with their skill set, but now we're having to teach them a lot of these softer skills that they didn't learn, coming of age, so to speak. Is that good? Okay.
How do we entice millennials to join a perceived, stodgy legacy industry like traffic? We're doing the best we can to put a nice, technology bow of ITS, on our industry.
Sure.
How do we entice more millennials to join and help the growth through automated vehicles, connected vehicles?
Sure.
How do we leverage those?
Really great point. So the technology piece is always going to be important. And technology, most companies are now technology companies. Technology and marketing companies, if you're going to be real about it. And it's fascinating, like working with, we work with a lot of auto dealerships, and they have the same challenge where they're, how do we get young people excited about coming and working here? Well, it used to be that when you worked at a dealership, you were like the grease monkey fixing everything. Now you're basically like a programmer where you're putting everything in and analyzing everything via computer. So that certainly changed the game. The biggest challenge is awareness, and this is what we found in our research with millennials entering into typically non-millennial industries, was that the number one way these folks found these job opportunities was from referrals. And so a lot of folks are spending a ton of money on all of these websites like ZipRecruiter and Craigslist. That's a luck of a draw. I've got stories. But when it comes to how do you attract people, a big part of it is empowering your team with a story that they're going to share with their friends, their families, et cetera, because it's cheap and it's the most effective, because that way you're not having to worry 2 years later, oh great, did I make a bad hire? Because good people know good people. But most organizations don't know how to train their staff to become raving fans of their company. It's like, when you get married, right? Like you date, you get married, and then you stop dating, right? Employment needs to be the same thing. I'm dating you during the interview process, onboarding, it shouldn't just stop. You should be continually engaging with them so that at Thanksgiving and Christmas and when they're at happy hour with their friends, they're talking about what a great culture it is, because people care about culture. That's why they're actually making these shifts and these moves that we're seeing right now with employment, is they're willing to move for more culture because they want to know, again, that work matters, significance, purpose, everything I've been saying. So equip your team with a story that they can then recruit their friends is going to be really important. But folks are now doing culture interviews too, where they'll actually do like a walkthrough of their office, meet the folks on our team. So it's no longer posting the job description. If you guys want help too, I've got another, you'll get all the free things. The onboarding program, but I also too have, we call our ultimate guide to millennials. It has sample job descriptions, it has sample interview questions, all that. So just put your card up here, I'll send you guys that for free as well. Because I think that'll also be helpful, is how you set the context when you're actually putting the jobs out there. Because you have to deal with an education piece of it too. You need to educate them about the opportunity before you recruit them for the opportunity. I think this will be the last one.
So last night we had a conversation about company trying to onboard a millennial candidate that fit what they really wanted, but
Sure.
the candidate was demanding title more than they were demanding anything else. And
Sure.
I experienced that in my prior role. We had some younger millennials. I don't know which category they specifically fell into, but
Probably the messed up one.
they wanted to
Okay.
they wanted to go directly to a director level or manager level.
Yeah.
And so we actually created positions for some of them because they did have great potential to say, kind of prove yourself. You know, we want you to take over the strategic lead, and then they just
Sure.
didn't do anything.
Sure.
And they ended up leaving anyway. But
Yeah.
on the conversation last night, I mean, how do you manage this constant demand for, I want to have a title.
Sure.
I want to have a management title more than they want to prove that they can actually do it.
Sure. Yeah, I'll one up you. We had an employee recently who ended up leaving, but he was asking for equity in his job interview. And I was like, oh, pumpkin, no. like number one, you're 5 years older than me. You should know better. But like number two, no, I'm not giving you equity of my company, right? But for him, he was like, this is fun. And I'm like, it's not, it's my company, right? So a big part of that is asking the interview questions. We actually give live feedback in our interviews to see how they take feedback. So during our interview, we'll say, hey, can I give you feedback really fast to see how they are and how they receive it? Because the number one characteristic I'm looking for as an employer who employs millennials is I want them to be teachable. Because I can teach you all the skills, but if you can't take criticism and if you're not teachable, then you're not on our team because you're not willing to grow. You don't have that humility to do something bigger than yourself. So a big part of that, of course, is asking the questions in the interview process. There certainly are some millennials who do care about the title. And we've seen mixed data on it. Some are like, I just want to be a part of the team, just make sure I feel like I have ownership in something. I don't need a title. And then some other folks, do care. And now titles are so funny. Like, you're not an assistant. You're like, a manager of first impressions or whatever you are, right? We have our employees choose their own titles like once a year, and we never use them because one of my guys chose ancient Greek or something. I'm like, okay, show off. Calm down. So that, I think, is great when you're giving them that ownership piece of it, but you're right, sometimes they do want the title and they don't want to do the work because I will tell you why. My generation, to get into college, we had to have all these little micro leadership awards. I was the treasurer of the Key Club in 8th grade, and we did not have a budget, okay? But I was the treasurer, right? So no wonder, you're like, this all makes sense. No, but no wonder my generation has a skewed view of leadership. It's because so many times we were told you have to have these positions of leadership to get into college, and it was in name only. And helping them understand, it sounds like you had that conversation, you wanted them to prove themselves, because that's what my generation needs more than anything else, is we need to have an opportunity to fall hard. And some of us fell during the recession, some of us were scooped up by our parents and didn't have that experience. But for many of us coming into our first and second time employment, that failure is happening in real time right now. And on one side, I don't want to end all depressed or anything, but millennial depression and opioid use has been up almost 50% in the last 3 years, and we're seeing a huge spike as millennials get into their mid-30s because many of them don't know how to deal with that failure, which is called life. So there's that challenge piece of it, as well. So are there any other questions? I answered that one quickly. Okay.
Just how do you arrive at some of this data? Do you collect it via surveys or interviews, or how do you get to some of this data
Yeah.
that you collected?
Survey Monkey. No, I'm just kidding. Y'all are like, what? No, I'm just kidding. So we do partner with international polling firms, everything from Burke, we worked with Gallup and Pew. So they bring us in, where I actually personally write most of the data out. I write all the survey questions, and they bring me in to analyze all of it. So we do a lot of live focus groups too, which is where a lot of the meat comes in, because, and I'll end with this, we just finished analyzing a set of data that took me 2 years to get it done. Thank God. So it's on millennials and the term loyalty. So I wanted to know whether or not millennials think of loyalty as longevity or passion, right? So, because most people think, oh yeah, I'm loyal, I've been here for 20 years. But what I thought, my hypothesis was, millennials are saying, yeah, I'm loyal because I really like my job and I like my coworkers. And I was right, so there's that. So we just got this polling data back, and so we're starting to send it back out for a little bit more clarification on everything from compensation to loyalty, et cetera. So yeah, that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. So if you want any of the free goodies, like the onboarding and the interview question stuff, I think we're gonna take a break. Is that an okay thing?
No, we're gonna roll right into
He says, no. Okay, then just kidding. Then give me he goes, no, that's not true. Then just give me your card. I'm going to stick around. I know, immediate feedback. He's like, you're wrong. We'll go from there. Anyway, I'm going to give it to Bill. Anyway, thank you guys. Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want anything? What? Oh.
So first off, thank you.
Thank
Incredible.
you.
Good stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So she practices what she preaches, because I remember, Intersect comes together in a lot of ways. Do you remember our conference call?
Of course I do.
So Lauren and I are doing something at Lonsdale, and we're trying to make a call. So we got my cell phone sitting on the dash of my truck, and we're having a conference call. And you asked the questions.
Yeah.
And we gave the answers, and she explored what we were doing, what we were passionate about. And I just want to thank you, because Millennial Solutions has made a significant contribution to Lonsdale.
Yeah.
So above and beyond.
Well, thank you.
very
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Okay.
Very fortunate. We've got Catherine McGhee, who's going to be joining us tonight. And only because we think it's long titles and everything, but Catherine works as the Director of Research at the Virginia Department of Transportation Research Council. More importantly, made a couple things I did point out. Extensive background in safety, automated vehicles, and the coolest title I can imagine right now is the current Director of Innovation.
So that's a tough act to follow, particularly since I am not a millennial. I know you guys thought I was, didn't you? Both of my children are, and so now maybe I'll understand them a little bit better. I don't know what happened to the clicker. Doesn't matter. So I am very fortunate, and obviously I'm not a millennial because I've been with VDOT for 25 years. So I guess I'm loyal in longevity, but hopefully I'm loyal in other ways too. It is definitely a passion for me to have come up through the ranks of research and now to lead the Research Council. How many of you are from a state DOT? Other than Virginia, you don't count. Nobody. All right, so I'm going to share a little tidbit with you. It might come in handy at some point in your lives. Every state DOT has a research program. Did you know that? It's required. Federal funding goes to every state, and it must be spent on research. So every state has a research program, but most states completely outsource their research programs to universities in their state. In Virginia, we're really lucky that we have an in-house research staff. So we have about 30 full-time scientists, and all they do is research. And I think that's a result of a real culture of innovation that we have in Virginia. And that's been expanded recently with our new administration. The Secretary of Transportation created an Office of Innovation that will work to promote innovation across all of the modes. So not only do we have this culture in VDOT, but now we're expanding to our other modal agencies. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Office of Transportation Innovation. Now, keep in mind, I have been the Acting Director of Innovation for 2.5 weeks. So, bear with me here. So again, the Transportation Secretariat has a number of agencies beneath it, just like in every state, I'm sure. VDOT is the largest agency. We have the biggest budget by far. But there's also the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, the Virginia Port Authority. We have obviously a lot of port activity in Virginia. The Department of Aviation, which I'm learning more about. The Motor Vehicle Dealer Board, which I know almost nothing about, I'm embarrassed to say. And the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. And then Virginia Space is a big one. Did you know we have an agency called Virginia Space? Virginia Space is primarily located Wallops Island on the eastern shore of Virginia, and we actually send rockets into space on a pretty regular basis. So the Office of Transportation Innovation really exists to extend this concept of innovation throughout the Transportation Secretariat. We have a long history in VDOT, but it's very siloed. At the Research Council, we worry about VDOT issues, things that are happening on the roadways, and we don't get into, certainly not into space. So now we're looking to expand beyond what we've been doing in VDOT. There are three main buckets that the Secretary has identified for initial focus areas, and those are, I've heard a lot of talk about data. That's the first bucket, data and analytics. We got lots and lots of data. We're a data-rich industry, perhaps not as information-rich as we could be. So we're looking at ways to share data across agencies to make everybody's life easier and more efficient. The second bucket is broadband and wireless. Virginia is one of those interesting states, very much like Tennessee, I'm guessing, where we have some very urban areas. The Washington metropolitan area probably comes to mind right away. We have the urban crescent, Washington, Richmond, Hampton Roads. But beyond those areas, we have a lot of very, very rural areas that don't have access to high-speed internet. So we're working very hard across the Commonwealth, across all of the state agencies, to figure out ways to extend broadband into those rural areas. And the third bucket, the one I'm going to talk the most about today, is automated Virginia. So we're looking at connected and automated vehicles, we're looking at unmanned aerial systems, and we're looking at robotics. So I'll talk more about that. So I have to talk about the Research Council. This has a video. I don't know if you can play it back there for me. It's embedded in the presentation, so hopefully it works. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal, because I'm just going to talk while it plays anyway. The Research Council has existed since 1948, so we're getting ready. This year is our 70th anniversary. I have not been there the whole time, but we have a rich history of research. Now, obviously, we focused on applied research. We're not doing National Science Foundation work. We're doing things that are very geared towards making the agency better, improving the way we do things, making things cheaper, longer lasting, just overall better. We have 4 technical teams that make up the research division, and those are structures. So we are looking at bridges. Anybody want to guess the average age of a bridge in Virginia? It's somewhere between 50 and 60. When those bridges were built, how long were they expected to last? 50 years. 50 years. So half our bridges are beyond their design service life. Not a great place to be if you're a transportation agency. So we spend a lot of money keeping our infrastructure serviceable. And at the Research Council, we spend a lot of time looking for ways to do that better. How can we extend the service life of our infrastructure? Anybody want to guess what the number one challenge for bridges is? What's the worst thing that can happen to a bridge? Corrosion, exactly. Corrosion is the number one enemy of a bridge. So we're doing lots of work in corrosion-resistant materials. We just built our first bridge that uses A1010 steel, which is highly corrosion-resistant. You think we put it in Hampton Roads? Wouldn't that make sense? Right? No, we put it in Waynesboro. There's a story there, I guarantee you. And I'll tell you offline when nobody's recording anything, why we put the A1010 bridge. It's a corrosion problem, but not one you'd guess. So we're looking at corrosion-resistant materials. We're looking at concrete that cures faster. Clearly, one of the most expensive things on any project is traffic control. I came through a lane closure. Anybody else come from Virginia to this? I came yesterday. I was on I-81 for hours. And I have to say, the lane closure happened in Virginia, so somebody's getting a phone call from me. Went from 2 lanes to 1 lane. Nobody was working. I don't know what they were doing out there. It was a bridge project. You can't just pull the lane closure on a bridge project because we've got to let that concrete cure, or we're facing another problem a few years from now when we have a lot of cracking. And what does cracking do? It increases corrosion. So then we've got a really big problem. So that's one team. We have another team that looks at pavements. We spend more money on asphalt pavements in Virginia than any other single thing. I'm going to talk to you about connected and automated vehicles. When we talk to auto manufacturers who are working on automated vehicles, what do you think they ask for from a DOT? They're looking for really good pavement markings, and they're looking for state of good repair. They don't want all that expensive technology bouncing over potholes. So we're looking at ways to improve our asphalt pavements, since it's a big cost item for us. We're doing a lot of work in recycling. How do we take that old asphalt and turn it into new pavement? Anybody else doing that? Know about their states doing that? It's not as easy as you think. We're looking at mixing all kinds of weird things into asphalt pavements, but mostly just old asphalt pavements. And we're also looking at how we determine what that mix looks like. So lots of work going on in asphalt research. We have another team that we call our catch-all team. It's planning, environment, and economics. So we're looking at transportation planning. Anybody here a planner by education? I don't understand planners. So nobody ever asks the planner, nobody ever goes back and looks to see if that planner 20 years ago was right. Wouldn't that be interesting? I think that would be really interesting because they make all these projections about traffic volumes and congestion, but nobody ever goes back and checks them. It's a good job. So we have a planning. We do a lot of environmental work. Obviously, as a transportation agency, how we impact the environment is very important to us. So we do a lot of research on how to better deal with stormwater, how to deal with all the salt we spread every winter. Anybody a farmer? Read the Farmer's Almanac? I want to know what the winter looks like because the summer was terrible. And then on the economic side, that's pretty obvious. We get lots of questions about what's the benefit of this over that. What's the benefit of your research program? In 2017, we estimated our return on investment to be $67 million. We think that's okay for the relatively small investment that VDOT makes in us. And then the team that I used to lead, so naturally will be what I talk the most about, traffic operations and safety. And we're obviously looking at all the things that you guys are very familiar with. How do we keep traffic moving better? How do we improve safety on our roadways? And how do we deal with all this new technology that's coming down the pike? All right. So I want to talk to you about the automated Virginia piece for a bit. And I'm going to leave off the flying stuff and the robotics for today and just focus on connected and automated vehicles. And I want to start by saying that we're doing a lot in Virginia, but we're also very active nationally. Patrick's going to talk after me about some very specific things that he's doing, but we're engaging with him on a number of things. We're also leading a connected vehicle pool fund study. So we have a number of states that are contributing money to make a research program that's bigger and more robust and really focused on questions that states have about what connected vehicles will mean as they mature and come down the pike. So encourage your states to get engaged at a national level as well as whatever they're doing locally, because I think that's how we all learn and how we all make this come to pass. All right, so let's get specific. All right, this video has to play. This one's a YouTube. YouTube was down yesterday. Did you guys hear that? Were you all like frozen? I'm really hoping this works. So we partner a lot with Virginia Tech, our big engineering research university in Virginia, right there on the I-81 corridor. I think if you click on the big picture. maybe not. It's really funny. All right, so one of the things about driverless vehicles, when you start to think about how that's going to come to play in our network, one of the interesting things is pedestrians. So I'm a jogger. I'm a runner. If you run, you should be a runner, right? I'm a runner. So I was out running this morning. Y'all need some sidewalks, so I got to tell you. I was out running this morning, and you know, you sort of have this negotiation with drivers when you're a pedestrian, right? You look at them and you say, all right, are you looking at me? Do you see me? I'm going to cross the street. How do you do that if there's no driver? How do you make sure that vehicle, that system, has made that negotiation with you and that that vehicle is going to give you the right of way? Do you just assume it's going to happen? Do you get run over? How does that happen? So Virginia Tech was doing some research actually with Ford to try to determine what the impacts of that might be from a vehicle perspective. So they had this van running around in Northern Virginia, and it looked driverless. Do you see a driver? Now, see, I've sort of given it away by telling you it was a cool video. So the driver's seat there is actually a person wearing a seat suit. And so as the vehicle was moving around, you couldn't tell that there was a driver. And so a guy from the local DC news came up at a stoplight and was knocking on the window. And literally he said, dude, who are you? What are you doing? And it was all captured on video. It was really funny. But the point is, Ford was looking at different lighting on the outside of the vehicle to figure out if they could use different lighting patterns to communicate with pedestrians. Didn't work. People were distracted by the fact that there was no driver, and then it turns out there was a driver, and it sort of fell apart as a scientific experiment. But the issue is very real. As we begin to see this technology moving into practice, how do we deal with the things that we don't even think about when we're driving today? How do we deal with pedestrians and bicycles and other vulnerable road users? And how do we bring them into the ecosystem? So we've also done a truck platooning pilot in Northern Virginia. How many of you have driven in Northern Virginia? Okay, so I like to call Northern Virginia, I like to think about it as like another state, because it's not like the rest of Virginia. So there's Nova and then there's Rova, and Rova is the rest of Virginia. In Northern Virginia, because of the incredible congestion that they face, drivers are very, very aggressive. And so as we begin to see more of this automated technology rolling out, it's likely to be a very challenging environment. So we did this truck platooning demonstration. We had 3 tractor trailers. The first one, all 3 had drivers. So the automation was in the acceleration, deceleration. So the drivers in every vehicle were steering, but only the lead vehicle was controlling braking and acceleration. So they were traveling at pretty tight headways on I-66 in Fairfax County. We had incredible state police presence to help them get on and off the interstate and stay together as a platoon until they could get going. You can see that the state police are actually holding the traffic back in this picture. Was not the intent, and eventually they did let the other vehicles go. But what was most interesting to me was that as the trucks were traveling down I-66 at these incredibly tight headways, drivers were still cutting into the platoon. And I think that's a lesson that we all need to think about as this technology improves. How are human drivers going to interact with automated vehicles as we have this period of mixed fleet? And what will that mean to safety and to congestion? We also partner with FHWA on a number of things since they're our neighbors. Their research facility is in McLean, Virginia, which is in the Northern Virginia area. So we've done a number of experiments with them, and the latest was a passenger car platooning project where they were controlling, again, braking and acceleration of the vehicle so that they formed a platoon, and then they allowed a vehicle to join and leave the platoon. Again, an interesting experiment, but the vehicle joining and leaving the platoon was at the end, so probably not quite as challenging as what we'll see in the future. So why do I keep talking about Northern Virginia? Anybody know why we picked Northern Virginia as our test case for automated vehicles?
That's probably the worst traffic in the world.
Yes, so the DC metropolitan area is always ranked in that 1, 2, 3 spot somewhere for worst congestion in the country. We've got some very challenging conditions. As a result of all that congestion, we've got some really odd geometry going on. We've got places where we have lanes that end abruptly. We've got express lanes that, unless you're properly equipped, you can't use. And if you use, you pay a lot of money. We've got tunnels. Goodness knows we've got work zones. And all of that is very challenging for an automated system. It's challenging for a human driver, but as you're beginning to build these automated systems, it becomes very challenging for them as well. So we went there very deliberately. If the systems can work here, they can work anywhere. And so the other goal that we have, I love to talk about goals this morning, I gotta tell you. I'm stopping to buy some index cards on my way home. But the goal we have always had is to deploy the technology to deal with real problems. The technology's cool, and as a researcher, I would do it anyway. But we are deploying in Northern Virginia, and we're deploying to deal with real needs. So we've identified applications that are geared towards helping us meet our goals as an agency, reducing congestion, reducing fatalities, all the things that any transportation agency has as goals, but we're only looking at applications that help us move those goals forward. And we think that that's a really important piece of our program. So we have deployed field equipment in Northern Virginia. We have what we're calling the Virginia Connected Corridor. The little dots there indicate where we have field equipment deployed. The darker purple ones are actually on I-66 and I-495, and then the lighter colored ones are on the parallel arterials that surround those interstate roadways. So we're looking at both freeway and arterial installations, and then you can just see an example of one of our arterial installs. We are using CODA units for our dedicated short-range communications. We are a DSRC-based test bed. How many of you are big 5G fans? Well, so we think there's promise in 5G, but we don't have equipment we can go out and buy today. So when we look at that conversation about DSRC versus 5G, it's really irrelevant for us. We want the program to move forward. We want to continue to make progress. So we're using what's available to us today. And for us, that's DSRC for safety critical applications. But we are also using cellular-based communications for a number of applications that are not safety critical. We have a smartphone-based application that allows us to communicate with drivers who don't have equipped vehicles. There are not very many equipped vehicles moving around anywhere right now. Just aren't that many connected vehicles. So in order to be able to begin to get our work out there and to have people actually experience it, we also have a cellular-based application, and we believe that it has a lot of promise. All right, so for the geeks, who's a geek? I know we have geeks. All right, so for the geeks in the room, this is what our architecture looks like. We do have a cloud-based system. We are broadcasting SPAT. I just like to say SPAT. Patrick gets to say SPAT a lot. We are broadcasting signal phase and timing from our equipped intersections. We have a number of private sector partners that are using that data, which is really exciting for me. We're working with a company that provides data to Audi for their in-vehicle system. But we're also working with a small startup that's doing some pedestrian work. So we're working both ends of that spectrum, and we're really excited about the fact that not only are we broadcasting the data, but somebody's picking it up. And that's really exciting for us. You can also pick it up in our smartphone app. So if you drive around in Northern Virginia, you want to see what it looks like, just let me know. I'll hook you up. As you drive around, you can see the countdown timer for any of our equipped intersections. Now, there are some pretty practical reasons why this could be beneficial. You guys are all in the signal world. There's something that we've seen happening over the last 5 years with respect to the efficiency of our signal timing. Who knows what it is? Come on, it's the middle of the afternoon. Everybody wake up. No, I mean, like, it's a driver thing. It's a driver thing that's messing with our efficiency. Anybody know what it is? Thank you very much. I brought mine up here as a visual aid. What happens when people get to a red light? And then the light turns green and they're still doing this. And so our startup loss time is going through the roof. And we're losing all of that green time. And in a place like Northern Virginia, that's huge. And so anything that we can do to bring the driver's attention back to the forward roadway, we believe is really, really important. So these countdown timers, whether they're on our smartphone app or in an Audi or some other externally developed application, something as simple as that can make a huge difference in how our systems operate. And we believe that that could be really, really important. All right, before I move on, I want to say one thing. Well, let me do this first, and then we'll come back. Because all that talk about positive attitude this morning, I call myself the negative Nelly of automated vehicles, and I'll share with you why in just a minute. All right, so in terms of next steps, where VDOT's going with connected and automated vehicles, again, we're looking at those applications that we believe are immediately beneficial. So we're looking at an automated TMA, truck-mounted attenuator. We have seen, I don't know about in your states, but in Virginia, we've seen a huge spike in the number of crashes involving TMA vehicles. Again, I think it's driver distraction. I think people are not paying attention to the driving task, and they're running into things that they don't expect to be in the roadway. So we're looking at whether or not an automated TMA is feasible in the near term, like this year, next year, to get the driver out of the vehicle. We had one struck last year, resulted in a very serious injury, and if we can get the person out of that vehicle and provide a little more safety in our work zones, we want to do that. We're also trying to get better work zone information out to the drivers who are approaching our work zones. Again, people are not paying attention. There are too many distractions, too much going on inside the vehicle. Now, who's thinking, yeah, and you're just adding to it? It's a concern. We're worried about how we develop these applications so that we can deliver really good information without further distracting the driver. So we're looking at different modes of information dissemination inside the vehicle. But work zone information is really important. But there's the flip side to that as well. How can we warn our workers in the work zone of a potential encroachment? How can we let them know this vehicle is on a track that is not positive for you? Work zones are very chaotic environments. So how do we get that information to a worker in a way that he can do something about it? Get out of the way, seek refuge. And we're working really hard on that. The first and last mile solution, that's the automated shuttle. Anybody seen an Ollie or one of those low-speed automated shuttles? Have you had a chance? I think they have their headquarters right here in Tennessee, right? So we're looking at those and how we incorporate that into our overall network to begin to enhance transit service. We don't want to replace traditional transit, but rather to enhance it by providing those first mile, last mile solutions. I'm going to talk more about data in a minute. So let me do my negative Nelly thing here, and then we'll move on to more positive.